I gotta tell you, I love this tent. Let me tell you 5 reasons why, other than the fact that it comes from a cottage company. I always love when I can support a cottage company like Durston Gear. Let's get something out of the way right off the bat. I paid for this tent with my own money. Dan Durston did not ask me to do this review. He probably doesn't even know Dose of Dirt exists, which is fine. All right, let's talk about just how easy this tent is to set up. The first time I set this tent up, it was actually in a rainstorm. I got the tent that day in the mail, and I was so excited to use it, I couldn't wait. I'd heard great things about it, and I decided to just put my full trust in it on that very first night. So I went out in the rain, in the dark, set this tent up for the very first time. Now, Durston does have a pitching guide video out. I watched that video one time, then I went outside and did it, and it was so easy. He even gives some troubleshooting tips for what to do if your pitch isn't quite what you want it to be. If the peak is sagging, and I actually had that the first time I set it up, and so adjusted some things as he said, and it was perfect. What makes it so easy is that the steps for setting this tent up are so simple. You lay out the tarp, and then all you do is stake all 4 corners as tightly as you can and in as perfect of a rectangle as you can. Once all those 4 corners are staked, then you just insert your trekking poles. This particular tent is the first one I've used where you actually put the tip of the trekking pole up and the handle in the dirt, so make sure you get your trekking poles the right way, but it's so easy to use. Stake out the 4 corners, make sure they're tight and square, put in the trekking poles as tall as you can, and then you're done. Your tent is totally set up. And even though I set this up for the first time in the rain, inside the tent, it remained dry as a bone. I loved that. So if I can set it up for the first time in the rain, in the dark, and get it just about perfectly while keeping everything inside dry, I'm pretty confident that anybody can. I gotta tell you, one thing that prevented me from getting a trekking pole tent for a long time is I was worried about how hard they were to set up. Freestanding tents or tents that come with their own poles that clip in or go into sleeves are just a lot easier to set up. I've pitched a lot of trekking pole tents. This is the easiest I've ever pitched by far. So if you are like me and have held off on getting a trekking pole tent because you're worried it might be hard to pitch, don't worry about that. With the Durston X-Mid 1, that is not a problem. The second thing I mentioned was the quality of construction and materials. Let's talk about the materials first. This tent is made from what's called a sill poly. What that means is it's polyester that has a silicone to it, so it's actually waterproof. A lot of tents actually use a sill nylon, which has been a really common fabric to use in tents that are trying to shed some weight for quite some time. The problem with sill nylon is that when it gets wet, it sags. I have a Lanshan 1 Pro that's made of sill nylon. I like that tent. It's light, it's cheap, but when it's wet, it sags. And that's because it absorbs that moisture, and then that really weighs down the fabric. It also feels like that fabric really hangs onto the moisture, so you're packing up a wet tent and really carrying some extra water weight with you. Sill poly doesn't have that problem of sagging when it gets wet or absorbing that moisture. So to me, sill poly is a better material. When I'm looking for tents, I really prefer, I mean, if you can afford Dyneema, go for it. But if you're not getting Dyneema, sill poly, at least to me, seems like the way to go. Those are the materials. Let me come grab the camera and show you some of the details of the construction here so you can see what I'm talking about with just how good the construction is on this Durston. And I'll even show you some shots of my Paria arches 1 person, my Lanshan 1 Pro, as well as my Zpacks triplex. Dyneema is a little bit different, so because you can do some welding and things like that with Dyneema. So it's not a great straight across comparison, but I'll show you some side-by-sides of those 3 tents and this one on some key points. The corners where stakes are, these tops where the trekking poles go in, as well as the doors. And I think you'll be able to see just how big of a difference there is between those tents and this one. Let me come grab the camera and I'll show you the details on this one. So this is the top where a trekking pole goes in. I didn't tie out this guy line because it's optional and it's not very windy this trip, so ignore that. But you can see how there's got this double seam all the way around, and then each of these pieces also has a double seam. And then on this guy line tie out, which these are really important because this is what you're relying on if it's windy. It's got this super heavy duty stitch right here. And you've got these 2 heavy-duty stitches going all the way down. This thing is not going anywhere because it's anchored into this fabric, which is also just double stitched everywhere around. If you look at some other tents, I was particularly disappointed with the Paria Arches 1P, and this spot on the tent it just looked really sloppy. You can see where some pieces just didn't come together quite right. This one has a lot more and better stitching, so I have a lot more confidence that this point is going to hold, which is important because there's a lot of pressure on this point right here. This is where your trekking pole is sticking straight up into the tent. So there's, you know, basically all the weight is on these 2 points for this tent. So this is important. The other spots are down here on these. So this is one corner that just has one of these, but you can see it's got this heavy duty stitch here, here, and here. So you can see that stitching again is not going anywhere. And on this corner, you got this double stitching all the way around. And actually, if we look at the other corner over here, because this is so close to the inner wall right there, so that there's actually 2 of these. Each of them has that super heavy duty stripping stitching, and then again double stitching all the way around. Another stress point on this tent. So I'll show you some side-by-sides of the corners of these other tents as well. You'll see none of them look like they're as heavily duty stitched as this Durston X-Mid one. Some just have one stripe of heavy duty strip stitching. Some maybe do a little bit more, but none have as much as this Durston X-Mid. To me, the Durston X-Mid is going to last a lot longer than any of these other ones. And then the other spot that I looked at that I think is really important is the doors. This is another place where there's a lot of stress. You can stake out the door on the Durston, so I have one here. I'll usually stake out the door that I'm going to be coming in and out of. You can see on each side, it's got super heavy duty stitching there and there. There, if you want to need to put another stake there, got it there as well. And then again, this double row of stitching all the way around this point. I'll show you some side-by-sides of the other tents. None of them have this much on the doors either. Once again, Durston just seems like they're doing an extra good job on all of these really important points on a tent that give me a lot more confidence that it will last longer even in harsh conditions. So as you can see, comparing this tent to some of the others in similar price range or even more expensive, the Durston X-Mid one just feels like there's a lot more attention paid to the construction and durability of the tent. There's also a couple of really cool features that they've included in this tent that I've got to show you. First, these zippers are waterproof. Most tents will have some kind of a flap to cover the zipper because the zipper is not waterproof. I have seen some people say that it's hard to open, but it's actually not that hard to open. It's a waterproof zipper. It's not hard to open. So that's a cool feature. Another one is that when you roll this door up out of the way, most tents will have a little toggle. This is actually magnetic rather than having one of those toggles you have to try and feed through a loop. So a lot easier to use and undo. Another feature that's really great is the doors. I have some tents where when you open the door, it just falls right down on the floor. I like that these doors hang and you can actually roll these up out of the way as well. And now that we've got the tent open, we should talk about just how spacious this is. So you've got a vestibule here and you've got a vestibule on the other side of the same size. The thing I love about this vestibule is the biggest area where you can store stuff is out of the way. It's not in front of the door. The way most vestibules are designed, the place where there's the most space is right in front of the door where you're trying to come in and out. This one, you can tuck a lot of gear back here and it's going to be completely out of the way. Let me grab my pack. So my pack is totally in this vestibule. It's not sticking out at all and it's completely out of the way. I can get in and out of the tent. This isn't even close to in the way, which is so much better than any other trekking pole tent that I've used. And you have this on both sides. There's another vestibule just as big as this one on the other side of the tent. Now I'm going to set my sleep system up in here so I can show you just how spacious it is with that in there. But before I do that, let's grab the tape measure. I'll show you how big it is before I put anything in here. All right, bad news, friends. Apparently the videos I took of me measuring the tent when I was out on the trail did not work. So I set it up again here at home and I'll measure here at home. Here we go. So the width of this thing is 30 inches all the way from the bottom to the top. Oh, grass messes it up, but put the tape measure on there, 30 inches. And like I said, that's all the way down. So I usually use a 23-inch wide pad. That'll give you 7 inches on the side. I know some people like a 25-inch wide pad. You're still gonna have 5 inches of room all the way up and down. And then it's also 90 inches from the foot to the head. Now, because it's a bit of a weird shape, you can see rather than being straight and then straight down there, it's got this little triangle shape at each end. So from this corner all the way up to that corner is 90 inches. And then we'll get the same thing on the other side. This corner, here we go, all the way up to that corner, 90 inches as well. So my seating pads are usually 75 to 78 inches tall, so you'll still have 15 inches, or I would still have 15 inches to 12 inches of room between above my pad and below it. And I actually really like the shape of it, because my pad, rather than sliding all the way down, it kind of gets stopped by this corner. And then you still got space down there. Same thing up at the head. As far as peak height, do this outside right here. So to the top, it's 42 inches, but you can see, I mean, that's all the way to the top. I mean, as far as headroom, you're probably closer to 38 or something like that. I'll show you sitting in the tent in a little bit so you can see what that actually looks like. And then in the vestibules, from the pole to where you stake it out, it's about 2 feet of room. So, and then yeah, 2 feet there. So tons of room in here to store gear. One thing that I think keeps this tent so square is the fact that where you attach the poles down here, it's got these loops. So this isn't going anywhere, it's gonna stay right there. And I really like that. It's the same thing over on this side as well. That makes a really big difference. So there you go. There's the tape measure. Now we'll cut back to the footage of on the trail, and I'll put the sleep system in here so you can see what that looks like as well. There it is with just the pad in there. This pad is 75 inches tall and 23 inches wide. So this is a decent sized pad. Let's get out the quilt. No, first, the pillows. This is a tall pillow setup. Move that up all the way. Like I said, tall pillow setup, but still lots of room. All right, now for the quilt. This is a very poopy quilt. A Hammock gear 0 degree quilt. So it's gonna get really lofty. I wanted you to see just how much room there is. You can, I mean, it hasn't finished lofting up, but you can see it's not touching there at the foot end, which most tents I've used, especially trekking pole tents, just because of the slope of the tent, my foot box is touching there, or my head is touching there. But you can see lots of room in here. We'll let that loft up for a minute. Give you a look from this side. There's the quilt. Lots of room. Got the pack there right in the doorway. Still plenty of room to be able to get in and out of the tent. Really spacious. So I've got the quilt and the pad set up in there, and this is what's so great about this offset 2 trekking pole design. If you think about a typical 2 trekking pole tent, both trekking poles are right in the middle, and then you've got the sides coming down straight from there. That makes those angles pretty steep. And not only is it annoying because the poles are right in the middle of the door, but it makes it so your head and your foot may both be touching on the ends of the tent. I know that's happened to me when I have a loftier setup like this. The great thing about the offset trekking pole designs is that having a trekking pole over here makes this wall a lot more steep, meaning it's not coming down at a shallower angle where your head or your feet are probably going to touch. You've got another pole over here doing the same thing at the foot end. That's what is so great about this setup and why it gives you so much space. In fact, the very first time I set this tent up, like I said, it was in the rain, so I shoved my entire sleep system in there and I had to blow up my pad, lay out my quilt, everything like that while I was in the tent. And it was spacious enough that I could do that. I was rubbing my back and stuff against these mesh walls, but I never touched the fly of the tent, which was definitely wet because of how humid, how rainy it was outside. But just because of all the space in the tent and then between the mesh and the fly, I never got moisture on my back or my butt or whatever from rubbing against the sides of the tent. It's nice how far away That is from the mesh. I could move around a lot without worrying about brushing up against the side. Okay, so this is sitting up inside of the tent. You can see my bag back there. So, I mean, my head's definitely touching, but I'm sitting as tall as I can on top of a 4-inch pad. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time sitting in my tent. Should probably close this. Sorry for the view. Let's close this and have a look. I love that I don't have a tent wall right above me. I mean, you can see that's there, but that's not actually, I think it looks closer in the video than it actually is. Most tents, because of the shape, as I said, you'd have a wall coming. I mean, my hat would for sure be touching it, be coming straight over like this. And if I sit up, I guess that shoulder's kind of touching, but you're not hitting the fly of the tent on either side. So it's a one-person tent, but for a one-person tent, I think there's a lot of room. Because it's a double-wall tent, you also have tons of room between the mesh and the fly, which is really important. A lot of trekking pole tents that I've used, especially, a lot of double-wall trekking pole tents that I've used, the mesh and the fly are so close together, it might as well not even be a double-wall tent. Part of the reason I would want a double-wall tent is for this mesh to prevent me from brushing up against the condensation that's on the inside of the fly. But when the fly and the mesh are super close together, it's not going to do that. And the last thing I'll say about spaciousness is it has these 2 gear storage pockets up here at the top. And I like these because these are elastic. So you can just slide things up there. There's another one right there. So they're in the same spot on either side of the tent. It's nice because it keeps it off the floor, out of the way. All right, I made a mistake. There's one other thing I really want to mention about this tent. I guess we'll call that, what are we on, 3B? Yeah, 3B. That is that it is adventure ready right out of the box. Other tents, I don't trust to be waterproof when they arrive. And some tents, especially sealed nylon tents, aren't even seam sealed when they arrive. So like my Lanshan 1 Pro, I love that tent. It's light, cheap, as I already mentioned, but I had to seam seal it when I got it to make sure that it was waterproof. This one I set up in a rainstorm. In fact, it snowed that night and I stayed dried. No water came up through the floor. It was perfect. Right out of the box, it's adventure ready. The fourth thing I mentioned already is that this tent is light, 28 ounces. There are lighter tents, but not with the quality and the space and from a cottage company like this one has. I think my Lanshan 1 Pro is maybe 3 or 4 ounces lighter than this one, but to me this is absolutely worth the additional 4 ounces because of the additional space, the quality, and supporting a cottage company. You're also likely saving weight in stakes. You only need 4 stakes to pitch this tent. I will always bring at least 5, and then if conditions don't look like they're going to be ideal, I'll probably bring a few more because there are some optional guy out points either on the tips of the trekking poles and then even along this seam, as well as in the middle of both the head and the foot end. So you can put an additional, I guess, 6 stakes in, but you only need 4, I would say 5, because you are going to want to stake out at least 1 vestibule. So you might be saving weight in stakes as well. Durston Gear actually includes some really nice light stakes with the tent that you order from them. All right, before we get to the last point, I just wanted to talk about takedown really quick, because takedown of the tent is really simple as well. You can actually just leave this inner layer connected. You can see it's connected there with a buckle. I just leave it connected the whole time. It's connected there. Don't take that off when you take the tent down, then it's super easy to set up next time. Just leave it connected the entire time. All you do is take the poles out, then it collapses down, take the stakes out, and then stuff it in the sack. And I'll show you once I'm done taking it down just how small it is when it is in the stuff sack. All right, there it is. And I gotta tell you, this is nice and small. In fact, as I was getting ready for this trip, I had this tent sitting on my table right next to my Paria sleeping pad, and I realized this is about the same size as that sleeping pad, especially if you compress it down. I mean, that could fit easily horizontally into my pack. You wouldn't have to put it long ways like this. You could squeeze it and put it that way. That's a really, really compact tent. Whew, Love that. The other thing I should mention is I asked the Dirt Junkies on Patreon what they wanted to know about this tent, and what most people responded with is they wanted to know about the quality and construction, the durability of this tent. That's why I looked so thoroughly at some of the other tents to compare those tents to this one. So thank you to those over at Patreon who stressed that you wanted to hear about the durability, construction, quality of construction on this tent. If you want to check out the perks over at Patreon, I'll put a link in the description and pinned comment below. And a massive shout out to all the Dirt Junkies over at Patreon. The last item, as I mentioned, is the price. I think this tent, especially with everything else that we've already covered, is absolutely budget friendly. In fact, in a poll right here on YouTube, I asked you guys, what price range would you look for if you wanted a tent that would save you some weight but was quality? If I remember right, over 40% said the $200 to $300 price range. This tent falls right into that price range at $240. In my mind, that is a steal for the quality, the durability, the spaciousness, everything else that we already covered, and the fact that it comes from a cottage company. The other budget-friendly item I'm testing on this trip is this Nature Hike backpack, 65 liters, and it was only $100. So far, I'm really liking it. When that video is ready, I'll put a link to it right here. Until then, you can check out this budget-friendly loadout that's 9 pounds right here. It doesn't include the Durston or the Nature Hike, so I may have to update my budget-friendly loadout in the near future. Remember, life is better with some dirt in it.